let's start
Let's
with
see how we
the
go.
important things. Your
Yes.
name, date of birth, place of
Well,
birth.
my name's Eileen Gross, no middle names. Right.
And you were born what?
Born 1924.
Oh, like me.
Really? In London. Okay.
What was your maiden name?
Leapman. Leapman.
Right, you were born in London where?
Maida Vale.
Now tell me a little about your background, your home background.
Well, I have one brother, so there's just the two of us. Both my parents were alive all the time that I was growing up. Now then, my parents were actually married in the Brondesbury Synagogue, but very shortly decided that Orthodox Judaism was not for them, and they joined the Liberal quite early on, obviously, in the Liberal, and so consequently I was brought up with a Liberal background completely. Went to classes at St John's Wood, and then when we moved to Hendon, still went on going to the classes. My brother wanted to be bar mitzvah, and in those days there was no bar mitzvah in the Liberal Synagogue, so my parents joined at Golders Green in order that he might be bar mitzvahed. And I suppose really childhood-wise in relation to the religion, that's about as far as I can go. I always remained a member of St John's Wood.
Right, now before we carry on any further, tell me a little bit about your parents, name, where they were born, date of birth, and what do you remember about your grandparents? So let's go that far back get an idea of your general background.
As far as I can recall, my father's father was dead long before I was born. My father's parents, incidentally, my father goes back a long way at being English. Right, into, I should think, something like when the Jews were let back into England. That's when we come back from. So there was only both grandmothers were alive, but
on both your parents' side,
what?
English Jewish families?
Yeah, my mother's parents, I believe, came from Germany, but were in England before my mother was born.
So now,
so they weren't refugees from anything.
So give me your father's parents' names, first names, date of birth, if you have them.
My father's name was Baron. Date of birth, I'm sorry, I can't remember at this point. My mother's name was Grossman. It's funny because she was a Grossman and I became a Gross. Right. Her mother was widowed very, very young. But my father's mother died when I was about 18 months or 2 years. I don't remember her at all. My mother's mother lived to the age of about 80 and was bombed out of her flat during the war and died
in London.
In London. She died not so long afterwards. It rather affected her, and she died, I suppose, about 18 months later. So I was then about how old was I when she died? I should think I was in my mid-teens.
14, 15,
or thereabouts. No, I must have been
a little
older than that, because coming on to the next point, now, you didn't do Clive Winston?
No.
No, I don't. Now then, let's take the next point on. My father was in the jewellery business. My mother went down occasionally and gave him a hand. My father actually died the same day as President Roosevelt. But this will be the next stage, because I'll come on to that in a minute for you. Religious background, well, I've told you about my religious background. I went to classes, etc. I don't think, as I say, my grandmother, she was a bit of a tartar, my grandmother. You see, she brought up a very young family.
A materfamilias, we need those, don't we?
She brought up a very young family, and she was a widow when the youngest was 2. So I suppose she'd had to fight, for.
How many brothers and sisters did your father have?
That grandmother was fine. There was no problem there. My father was one of, I think, 7 boys and 1 girl, but of course they were all adults when their mother died. My mother was one of 7, and with a widowed mother. And in those days, a widowed mother who did, I believe my mother's father was a farrier, but.
So how did your motherly grandmother, your maternal grandmother, bring up all these 7 children?
I don't know, I have a feeling possibly she had a hand in what was left of the business. But as the children grew up, only the girls married. There was 4 girls, and all 4 of the girls married. But none of the boys married, none of her 3 sons married. 2 of them died quite young or disappeared quite young, and the 3rd one remained with her and sort of supported her. So
now I see why you had to marry a Gross.
To
to keep the initials in the
right,
family.
That's right, he supported me. That's right. Quite funny, you know, stay still. She's all right, she
No,
won't
she's
bother you.
lovely.
Right, okay.
Right. Well, so obviously language spoken at home was always
Always English.
English.
You see, I was never brought up. My mother didn't understand any Yiddish because my grandmother had never spoken any Yiddish. My father, of course, had never, ever. And we've always remained a very close family with the cousins on both sides. Interestingly enough, my grandmother had 7 children, and the 7 children only had 4 grandchildren. It's...
Right, carry on.
Right. Now, when
So your father was a jeweler, you
my
said.
father was a jeweler. Right. He died, well...
You
coming
probably
back
will want to know where was his jewelers? Where
in,
was his business?
In Trafalgar Square. Well, you know, in one of the arcades there in Trafalgar Square. Most of his brothers, funnily enough, were in the jewellery business.
What was the name of the firm?
I think it was called, one had business called Hope On, and one was called Lead On, and Lee was for Eileen, and the Don was for Donald, my brother's name.
How lovely.
My brother unfortunately lives in Canada. Gave up the religion many years ago. But we visit him very frequently. Go over the daughters.
You're very close.
Oh, we're very close. We talk maybe every 10 days. We see them mostly perhaps once a year. He was over here Christmas. We've just come back. This is just as I'm digressing.
No, it's not so much digressing. It's part
my
of
background with the Liberal Synagogue was I knew virtually everybody as the Liberal Synagogue because I was so young. I mean, I knew Israel Mattock, Leslie Edgar. In fact, just as a part, which you might be interested in. Right, so I knew them all. In fact, we've just come back from San Francisco, and we were stopping with a lady who was Israel Mattock's secretary.
Oh, interesting.
And I've remained friendly with, right from when she went over to America, which is 30 odd years ago. So that in itself is quite interesting because she knew Israel Mattock obviously extremely well. And a lot of members of the congregation obviously knew too. Right, so I'll come back. Well, I volunteered to join the forces. I'd been with the Red Cross and I'd done a certain amount of work with the Red Cross. And I joined up as a VAD.
Just a minute. What did you do? How did you finish school? O levels, A levels, or
We
whatever
didn't have them in those
Yes,
days.
what did one have in those days? I don't really know.
Well, I suppose. I can't remember.
So you
really.
were how old? You
I
were
didn't.
18, 16, 18?
I would have said I was about 16. Yeah. And then I went to Bittman's College.
Oh, where did you go to school, incidentally? Which school?
Cocteau County School. And most of the daughters of the members of my cousins had been to the same school. So the Leitman girls were well known, you know. And another thing which is of interest, I have a first cousin, both our fathers were brothers, who lives at number 22. I mean, she came here specifically because we were here. So, you know, it's all joined in. And so I joined up as a VAD, attached to the Navy. And so that was, you know, I was nursing with the Navy. And my father died.
Where did that take you?
That took me down to Plymouth, and then up to Liverpool. Then I went back to Plymouth again, and when not so long after I'd been down in Plymouth, I heard that my father had died very suddenly.
That was when?
That was I can tell you, that was the 12th of April, 1945, I think it was. Yes, it was 1945.
Well, just before the end of the war.
He died. As I was travelling back from Plymouth, you know, to come back up here, I heard somebody say President Roosevelt's died. So I always remember my father died on the same day as President Roosevelt. So that brings that back. And in fact, when I got to London, an aunt and uncle were at the station to meet me, because I travelled all night, obviously, and my father had committed suicide. He'd thrown himself in front of a train. We never really knew the reason as to why. We think it's because the pressures of business, home guard, I think he'd been to have his eyes tested and he got the impression that he was going blind. There was never any question that he was going blind, but I suppose all things together, and he'd committed suicide.
And your mother survived him?
My mother survived him by many, many years, because this is in 1945. My mother's only been dead about 8 years. My mother was a widow for longer than she was married. So that's how it goes as one is young. And then I came back, managed to get a compassionate posting back to London, and I was stationed in Victoria for a while at a naval establishment, and then eventually I managed to get discharged because my mother obviously wasn't terribly well. But once she pulled herself together, and I was home.
At that time, was there a sort of, I'm asking because I don't really come from this country and didn't grow up here, was there a sort of social or community or congregational help from the liberal community? I mean, was it sufficiently close-knit as a community so that you had some support?
Nothing at all. No, I would say not. Definitely not. I would think that the minister came Rabakokotek for my father,
yeah,
as far as I can recall, and
that's Rabakokotek who just died.
Oh yes,
a little while ago,
yes. And as far as I can recall, that was it.
Mm.
You know, there was virtually nothing else. Probably no other contact at all. Now you see, we by this time lived in Hendon, but that still wasn't any reason why they shouldn't have been. But I suppose my parents hadn't been regular goers, and although we were very well known in the congregation, because we still have Leekmans in the congregation at St John's Wood, I suppose in those days, one knew, but perhaps there wasn't enough ministers after all.
You said Leekman, I think you gave me the spelling before, is
L-E-A-P.
L-E-A-P.
M-A-N, yes. Right, so if you want to stop it now, or you want
No,
to
just carry on.
Well,
I think you're fluent. You tell me a little bit.
Yeah, but I feel I'm just
about
talking.
your well, that's fine. Ongoing involvement, your work, your professional work.
So then
how and when you met your husband.
Well, we have a long way to go before I met my husband, because I was married when I was 33. Well, then
So when you mobbed, when?
I suppose about 1940, late 40s, at 47, 1947.
Did you have any special grade in
Well, it's grade 1, yes, but I still belong, because Edna Lamb, that I just spoke of, she also was a VAD mobile, although we didn't know each other at the time. We now belong to an association for people who belonged, and that's quite, well then, when I came out, I had already taken secretary and shorthand and typing.
Where?
At Pitman's.
At Pitman's.
I had been for a little while, before I actually joined up. I had been at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington where I started out my career in the secretarial business, and still again have kept up with the majority of people that I knew there. And we have a reunion lunch next week, and this is going back a hell of a time.
For over 40 years.
Yes, so we have a reunion lunch. We had one almost every year. We try, and perhaps 8, 10 of us have a lunch at somebody's house and move around.
Just as a matter of interest, were there lots of Jewish members?
And the VADs?
In the VADs?
I don't know how many, because we didn't specifically...
okay.
But I did used to make contact through other people who said, we know people who live in Plymouth, so I would have made contact with people in Plymouth. And I went to one home, and they very kindly invited me round for a Friday night supper. And I went round there, and they were very, very, very orthodox, but which was completely different to me. I mean, this is all right, this is it. And this family was extremely pleasant family, but very, very orthodox. And where we went into the lounge, the big lounge, all right?
Yes.
We went into the big lounge, and the mother was there, and married daughter was there, and we started a conversation. And then the husband came in, and he started, he put on his tallis and his couple, and started his prayers. The ladies went on talking, and I found this most disturbing. Then the second male member of the household came in, and he put on the necessary things, and he started his prayers. So the two men were at different points anyway. And then a third member came in and started at a different point, and I found this all most disconcerting. Eventually we had our meal, and of course we did benching, after the meal, which I'd never come across before. And I was very happy to have been there. But next time they asked me round for a Friday night supper, I said that I was on duty, but could I come in after the meal, please? And I stood at the front door and waited till they finished benching, and then I knocked.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I also was introduced to an extremely nice family up in Liverpool. They weren't quite as orthodox, but so it was nice to have people to go to. But so completely, I mean, at home, for example, my mother would light the candles. And we always had a Friday night supper and we always had it together. I don't recall what happened when we were very small, whether or not we stayed up, I doubt it. But when we were old enough to stay up for supper, we had the candles lit. And until we grew to an age where we were doing our own thing, none of us ever went out on a Friday night. But we didn't go to synagogue. For two reasons, I think. The main reason being that my father and mother used to go out mainly on the high holy days. And secondly, as I say, we lived up in Hendon from when I was the age of about 9. And my father, we never had a car. So it would have been too far for us all anyway to go out. And it wasn't a done thing in those days to get a babysitter.
Right.
So I think I've told you that, for the high holy days. And we always had Seder at home.
Yes.
It was a big family Seder. I expect we would be perhaps 12, 14, something like that. Very large, as I say, large numbers of the family. I think I could say that of my father's 7 brothers, 4, with their children, belonged to St John's Wood. That also was quite a family occasion at the High Holy Days, because we always used to sit close to each other. And the widow of one of my father's sisters still belongs there with one of her sons, one of her sons and a daughter. So they, of course, but the rest of us have, unfortunately, left the congregation. But my cousin, who lives in Azalea Walk, still goes right the way down to St John's Wood because she still belongs there.
Did you have a kosher household? There was no kosher.
No,
I know.
had never been. Even
No.
my grandmother didn't. You see. So I had various. When I came back after being in the forces, I didn't go back to St Mary's. I did 1 or 2 smaller jobs, and then I finished up and went to a bank. And I gradually worked my way up.
Is it indiscreet to ask which bank?
No, in those days it was called Glyn Mills.
Yes.
It became Williams and Glyn's, and it's now part of the Royal Bank of Scotland. But I worked my way up, I suppose one could say, from being just in a small department right up to work for the Chief General Manager. And when he retired, after I'd been there 15 years, I decided the time had come for me to retire. And I spent a few years doing nothing at home, and then I took a part-time job. And then, having done a part-time job in West End, I thought, no, this is...
Again, secretarial.
Oh yes, secretarial. Well, then I found a part-time job locally, which was legal secretarial, which I'd never done. But as I said when I went to be interviewed, anybody can pick up anything if they've got a minimum of intelligence, and I picked up legal work, and from then on I've virtually never done anything but legal secretarial work. And eventually, I suppose, after about 2 years, I gave up legal work. I gave up that part-time job. I went into temping.
Well, that would bring
temporary work.
Where? That would bring you to what time of what year roughly?
I suppose I've been doing temporary work for the last 12 years, but now, for 2 years, I used to work for an agency, but now I've decided I've gone self-employed, and I just do my own, take it when I want it. I have just a few solicitors as clients, and I go there, I still do it.
Oh, marvellous.
I still go. Last week I was there a whole week. They wanted me this week. I decided I had too many things happening. Next week I'm working one day. I take it from there. Yes. So I don't have any problem there. Now, where would you like me to go?
At some stage you must have met your husband.
Yes, I met my husband while I was still at Glyn Mills. I had met him on a couple of previous occasions, perhaps at dances or things like that. He has two no, they're not stepbrothers, just they're stepbrothers, not half-brothers. And he had 2 stepsisters. So he was the only child of his father's first marriage. And there were 4 children of his mother's first marriage.
Do you know the name of your husband's maiden name of your husband's mother?
No, not a clue.
No.
No, no. All I can tell you is that her 4 children by her first marriage took the name of her second husband, which was Gross. So they became Grosses.
Now, what sort of background was that? Also liberal?
No, it wasn't. Toby's father came from Poland. His mother came from France, his own mother. His own mother died at the age when he was 6 months old, so he never virtually knew her. But just digressing onto that, although he never knew her, every year he still goes up to Edmonton Cemetery and says Kaddish. Yeah. And we're talking many, many years, you see. So so eventually they started off in the cash register business. And they gradually built up a very big business which became a public company. They were taken over by Chubbs many years ago, and but by then he was travelling down to Brighton daily, and it was Chubbs asked him if he'd like to retire early, and he said yes please, so he retired early.
When was your husband born?
1914. He's exactly 10 years older than I. He's fortunately very active.
Can I get the precise date of birth once we're about?
1st of March.
1st of March 1914. And he was born where?
He was born in London.
Also in London.
Or in London, yes, yes. And his father had been a widow, and he lived in, I think, somewhere in the East End, in Eric Street, and he was looked after by a non-Jewish lady, of course, who had grown up family of her own, while the father was working.
And that was a traditional sort of Jewish house?
Oh, no.
No, again not.
When I say not, the father, you see, had lost his wife very young. The wife was very young, and Toby being brought up by a non-Jewish lady during the day, there would have been nothing else. But his aunt, who was the father's sister, lived very close by. She was very frum. Well, she kept a kosher household. How frum she was, I don't know. Digressing again from that, you see, it's not really, you're right for this, no, it's not really digressing. He has one cousin whom he's very, very close to, who was the child of this aunt who lived close by. And he lost his wife, unfortunately, in about May of this year. So we see even more of him than we did before, because she hadn't been terrible. And couple of months ago, last time we went to the lunch at the synagogue, we brought this cousin along with us, and he is, in fact, Dorothy Tarl's brother.
Yes,
So
I remember
Dorothy
you had
Tarl.
somebody, I remember
Dorothy
you.
Tarl is Toby's cousin.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So it is getting that. So when Toby was about 7, I think his father took him over to visit the relatives in Poland. And while he was over there, he was introduced to somebody else who was a distant relative somewhere there, or just visiting, to a lady who had 4 children. And eventually, she lived in England anyway, and eventually he married her. So he has the 4 children. Both the sisters were older. There's one brother who's about 5 years older than Toby, and another brother who is about 7 or 8 weeks younger than Toby. So, see, so he was brought up in a background where,
Carry on.
Now, Toby's very, very quiet, so I'm the talker in the family, see. As I say, this is partly inherited, because my mother wasn't a great talker, but she was a great listener. She was a great listener. But she had one sister who talked and talked and talked. But I knew that she was a talker, so I do try to curb myself. And she has,
I know the feeling.
Yeah. She had only one child. And he's done very well. He's Geoffrey Finsberg. Do you know Sir Geoffrey Finsberg, MP?
I don't know him, I know his name.
He's MP
of
for
him.
Hampstead. And he's also one of the vice chairmen for the Council for Europe. So he's
Oh yes, of course, I know
yeah.
whom you're talking.
So he's my first cousin, but we're also very close. Yesterday I was down at the Royal Free Hospital helping his wife running her stall at the hospital for the bazaar. Right, so that's that. So we take Toby a stage further, and we became friendly because we'd met on several occasions, and then I asked him to a dance in a party, and so we became friendly after that. and I suppose about a matter of 6 months after that, we became engaged, and then we married in 1958.
Where?
At St John's Wood, because he converted from being a member at Norwich Lee to become a Liberal. Because first of all, I think it had more to offer him. Secondly, although I would have been eligible to marry in Orthodox synagogue, it never appealed to me. Virtually many of our friends belonged anyway to St John's Wood.
So who was your officiating rabbi at them?
Philip Cohen. Philip Cohen officiated. I knew Philip Cohen also very, very well, and Bobby, his wife. And of course I knew John Rayner right from when he joined the synagogue. Now I was telling you about Toby's background. Now Toby's father came to England before the First World War.
From where? Poland,
from
you said.
Poland, and joined the army, which I could presume in those days would have been a pioneer corps. But he had, and his sister came over here, but I don't know her background of whether she married over here or whether she married over here. And I think she married over here. But he had another brother who stayed in Poland. That was Toby's uncle, who made in Poland. And obviously, they lost touch with each other. After the father visited Poland when Toby was 7, I doubt very much if he had much in the way of contact. Well, then, of course, when all the troubles came, that was that. And some many years after the war, we had a letter, only 2 or 3 lines, possibly, from Israel, addressed to Toby, saying that it was from the son of the brother who stayed in Israel. He had emigrated from Poland some years after the war, while they were still being let out, which they weren't for a long time, as you know.
Had he been in concentration camp?
And he had trained as a doctor, and he wasn't actually sent to concentration camp. He was sent to Germany, and he was doing forced labour. His wife had been certainly in concentration camp. He lost all his family, and his wife lost all his family over in Poland, because he went out somewhere for the day, and when he came back, he was very fortunate. He was met by a German soldier who said, "Don't go to that house. Run away. Throw your documentation away and run and become a displaced person," which he did. And eventually, after the war, he went back to his hometown. He met up with this other lady who had in medical school, and they both qualified. And eventually, when they had 2 children, they managed to go to Israel. And that's where he'd written to us.
So that's
from
Toby's
Israel.
cousin.
First cousin.
First cousin.
And the daughter came over as a young girl, and we met her. We went down to Bournemouth to meet her. This is following on from the 1 or 2 letters that we had. They didn't speak a lot of English. She came over to learn English to Bournemouth. We got into correspondence, and then I think it was about 1971, we went to Israel for our first visit. We found them absolutely delightful people, and Toby, I think, felt closer to him than he felt to his own adopted family. And they visited us in England on many occasions. We visited them in Israel on many occasions. And the daughter, well, that's digressing, but the son, who's now qualified also as a doctor, he's specialising in plastic surgery, and is coming over to do a course in Billericay in Essex, which is a plastic surgery unit at one of the big hospitals, so we shall obviously see quite a bit of him now.
Right, back to Toby and your marriage, and
well,
where did you live after you got married?
When we lived after we got married was in Mill Hill.
And you remained members of St John's Wood?
We remained members of St John's Wood while we were in Mill Hill, because there was nothing local really in those days. So then, after we'd lived in Mill Hill about 5 years, we moved to Pinner. And just down the road from where we lived, which was West End Lane, there was a little house which was rented out.
That would have been which
West
year?
Lodge. Which year? Couldn't tell you what year, because I can't quite remember. All I can tell you is that we used to go to West Lodge not as members of the congregation. We didn't join West Lodge we didn't join that congregation until, I suppose they'd been going about 3 years, or thereabouts, could have been less, but we kept up dual membership for a number of years, and then decided that although we had been going down to St John's Wood for the High Holy Days, it was much too far. There was much too many problems with parking, so we gave up our membership at St John's Wood, and that's where we became, well, members only of Northwood and Pinner. And by that time, of course, they had their own premises in Northwood, the small premises, the old premises. Take it up from that point, but I'm not quite sure, you see. And then, as I say, so that's how we joined the Pinner congregation. But since we've been there, we've seen more and more members from St John's Wood coming out and joining. And it's become now where we know, of course, the congregation now is a young congregation. Although we still have a lot of people that we know there, it is obviously a very young congregation.
Yes, and as you have no children, you lose then the connection unless you happen to be involved with the activities of the congregation,
That's
isn't
right.
it? I mean,
yes.
I also have this contact because I'm involved with the activities to a certain extent.
So when we go to lunches every so
Yes.
often, and I don't make a point of going every lunch, you know, because
There's
I
no
think
time.
it's well, there isn't time, and I think it becomes a general thing, and I don't think personally it's a terribly good idea. I think it's a far better idea to go perhaps once in 2 months or once in 3 months. We go away a bit, not a lot. We go down to Portugal once a year, and so where can we take it from there? Although Toby
Now we're talking about Toby again, right?
Toby has two, as I say, he had 2 brothers, and they weren't, I think only one knew very much about engineering, and they decided that they would, one of them designed some form of cash register, and they started up in a shed.
Well,
in Hornsey. I know that it was in Hornsey. Well, gradually, obviously, when they started producing, and they got obviously financial backing of some sort, mostly through family people.
that would have been roughly when? Before the war?
No, I would have said just post-war.
Mm.
When they started up. But it takes quite a time to set a small,
Quite.
particularly even more so in those days when you didn't have a lot of government help. And they gradually started, then they bought eventually, or rented, some bigger premises in Hornsey and started producing cash registers on a basis where they were selling them. Of course, it was, at that time, the only English cash register that was, fully English cash register.
What was the full name of the
Gross
first?
cash registers. Gross cash registers. Well then, so gradually the business was getting bigger. And then later on, they acquired a factory on North Circular Road, which was the old Brill Cream factory. And then eventually they moved down to Brighton. And the company by this, before this point, had gone public. So it was by then becoming quite a well-known factory, well-known company. So that's all I can tell you about the business. Toby was completely involved in it, and obviously was a director when it went public. As regards Toby's background, I told you that the father went to Poland and met the stepmother. Well then, they went to live in Cardiff for a while because there were relatives down in Cardiff.
So that's where Toby went to school?
Well, he went to
by
school
that time he wasn't.
No, they did go to school. He went to school partly in East End, and partly in Cardiff. I don't think any of them took any form of degrees or matriculation or whatever in those days, because I think they probably didn't have enough money, and it was a question of when they were old enough to work, they worked. I mean, I know that Toby wasn't in the army because he had to be in munitions, because he did a certain amount of engineering. So that was that. And he was in the Home Guard. So more than that,
Right, you see, it all helps.
You see, it all helps. That's right. So you've got that much
puts the
background.
mosaic together.
Puts the mosaic together. Yes.
And
that's
then
right.
Toby.
And his father died. I think his father died about 30 years ago.
And the stepmother?
Stepmother died just as we were about to send out our wedding invitations. Just literally, the wedding invitations were printed. And so the stepmother. We're still in touch. We still keep in touch, but not close touch with Toby's 2 brothers. The 2 sisters are dead. We're still in touch with them. You know, we speak on the telephone and we see each other from time to time. But our lives diversified.
Of course they would. wouldn't they?
And we've lived in Pinner for many, many years. And we as I said, we used to live in West End Lane, only a few doors from where the congregation started at West Lodge. And about, well, quite a number of years ago, we decided that the house, the garden rather than the house, was too big for us. And we started to look around. We didn't find anything. I think we were probably looking for a house that had exactly the same as the other house had, but had a less of a garden. We never found anything. And then when our first little dog died, we decided.
Oh yes, did you always have dogs?
No, that was our first dog. But then we had her for 13 years. We didn't have a dog while I was in full-time employment.
Did you have help in the house whilst you were in full-time employment?
Yes, I did. I had the lady who used to help my mother, and I'm still in touch with her. She is now something like 87 years of age. She didn't give up here. She came here to this house with us. She was 81, and it wasn't a question of, her giving up. It was a question of how do I gradually ease her out. But nature intervened because we had a very bad winter, and she used to travel all the way from Hendon. And she found that it was, we had a very bad snowstorm, and she said, I won't be able to come for it, until the snow goes. So fortunately, that's where I kicked the habit. But I still speak to her. We went down to have coffee with her a few weeks ago. Right.
Right. Well,
that's all part of this. Yes, that's the routine. So then, when our little dog died, and we made up our minds we weren't going to have another dog, we started house hunting. And we lasted without a dog for a whole month, and then decided, no, this was ridiculous. We'd get a little dog. But we got a little dog that, because she wasn't a puppy when we had her, so we decided we could still move. She could adapt to a different house. And we came here because, having searched and searched something that we liked, we thought this looked rather what we liked. So that, you see, here, the other house we had a second bathroom. And we were geared up for having visitors coming to stop, because our visitors had their own room, the bathroom was en suite. We decided there was no way we were going to have the same number of visitors anymore, so we found it had everything we wanted, including, as you will see, no garden, virtually no garden at the back. And
so a miniature garden, lovely.
Can you see?
Well, just the size of a
patio.
my patio is that size.
Yes,
It's lovely. It's all you
patio.
want.
It's paved.
Marvelous.
But we have a most fantastic group of friendships here.
Is it very mixed? That's quite interesting, actually.
When you say mixed,
I mean socially mixed.
Yes.
I'm more thinking, I'm not thinking in terms of Jews or Christians.
No, but we're all mixed up together, and we have diversifying. If you want to diversify, I don't mind not diversifying, because I think you might find this interesting. Some neighbours who live 2 doors away have a son. They're not Jewish people, and they have a son. They have 2 sons. One is a solicitor, and about 6 years ago he married a Jewish girl who was not accepted by her family. She came from quite an Orthodox family, was not accepted by her family, and he decided, although they didn't want children, he was going to turn. And he did. He turned, and last November, just after he'd been accepted into his Reform congregation, they both decided they would have a wedding in the Reform.
In the Reform, where did they have it? In West London and Bushey.
And all the Jewish neighbours said to Margaret, we will all come and support you in synagogue. Although there was going to be a small family reception, we decided that we'd all go to synagogue. There was my cousin, the Lionses, the Foxes, the Grosses, and we all went. And by this time, of course, her parents said, oh, if you've got Jewish neighbours and they're coming to synagogue, we would very much like them to come to the reception. So we all went to the reception. In fact, because Margaret and Ray were allowed to stand under the chuppah, they were not allowed to sign the register. Ketubah. They were not allowed, as non-Jewish people, to sign the ketubah, so I signed, and somebody else as well. No, this is
very interesting. Well, I think we covered. I'll tell you what we do. First of all, I'm supposed to ask you that when it's all written down,
yes.
I think I've got to put that down. Oh yes, I wanted to ask you, have you got any photos that would be relevant
Do you want?
for the synagogue, yes?
Yes, I've got me in uniform.
You in uniform?
My father probably in uniform.
Yes.
I would like
and
them back.
anything, yes, I think they would make photocopies.
What's that?
Brian would make photocopies of that. And then I wanted to ask you, you have no objection, I mean, it's a copyright question I think I've got to ask you. They will reproduce the interview.
Well, not in full.
And then they will, whatever, and they're going to, it will be shown to you.
Oh, you're recording this?
No, yes, it will be shown to you. And then you decide what you want to cut out, and you may even decide what you want to add.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Is
I'll
that
get
fair
some
enough?
photographs
Oh,
for you.
that's lovely. Thank you very much
Right.
indeed.
As I say, we've always kept very close contact with my brother. My sister-in-law isn't Jewish. But very close contact, and we've been over to the two girls' weddings.
So
the two
if you have
daughters'
some
weddings.
family photos, either from your childhood, your husband's childhood,
We are both Tories.
always have been,
Pretty well, yes. Oh, yes.
registered members of the Tory party or
At one
subscribed?
time, but not now.
Not now.
No, but we always vote Conservative.
Right. Thank you very much.